you were never weak for caring. You were simply generous in places that could not hold what you offered. And that is how most damage begins, not with cruelty, but with misplaced devotion, with the quiet habit of pouring life into something that was never meant to carry life, something that slowly drains you while pretending to need you. And this is why removal feels terrifying, because you confuse extraction with destruction. You believe that if you stop feeding it, you will die. When in reality, you have been surviving on scraps for far too long, telling yourself that this is what love looks like, that this is patience, that endurance is the same as loyalty, and so you stay, watering what is killing your Barakah, calling it hope, calling it faith, calling it destiny, when deep down your soul has been asking you for silence, for space, for the bravery to step back and observe what your hands have been busy sustaining. There is a difference between nurturing and neglecting yourself, but when the heart is attached, that difference blurs, and suddenly sacrifice feels holy even when it is hollowing you out, and you start to believe that pain is proof of sincerity, that exhaustion is evidence of commitment, and you do not notice how your laughter has thinned, how your prayers feel heavier, how your intuition has grown quiet because it has been ignored for too long. And the most dangerous thing is not the plant itself. It is the story you tell yourself about why you must keep it alive. The narrative that says leaving would mean failure, that letting go would erase all the effort you invested, as if effort alone can turn poison into nourishment. What you feed grows, not just outside of you, but inside. Every thought you revisit, every memory you romanticize, every excuse you rehearse, you are watering something. And the heart is fertile ground. It does not judge what you plant, it simply multiplies it. And this is why certain attachments spread so fast, because they are fed daily by longing, by fear, by the illusion of control. And you tell yourself that one more chance, one more conversation, one more sacrifice will change the outcome, while ignoring the evidence written all over your spirit, written in your restlessness, in the way peace avoids you when you cling, in the way clarity only visits when you imagine distance. Removal is not cruelty, it is honesty. It is the moment you stop arguing with reality, the moment you accept that not everything that entered your life was meant to stay, and that some things came only to reveal where you still confuse intensity with meaning. And when you begin to understand this, guilt will rise first, because guilt always guards the exit, whispering that you are selfish, that you are ungrateful, that you are abandoning something that once mattered. But guilt is not a compass. It is a habit, and habits can be unlearned, especially when they are built on fear rather than truth. You are not responsible for keeping alive what was never healthy. You are responsible for protecting the space where your soul breathes. And this is where many people hesitate, because they were taught that self-protection is arrogance, that boundaries are rejection, that choosing yourself is a betrayal of love. But love that requires you to disappear is not love, it is consumption. And anything that consumes without giving life back will eventually leave you empty, no matter how beautiful it once looked, no matter how familiar it feels in your hands. The hardest part of removal is not the absence. That follows, it is the silence. Because silence forces you to confront how much noise you were using to distract yourself from your own needs. And when the plant is gone, there is space. And space can feel unbearable to someone who has been busy proving their worth through constant giving, through fixing, through staying. But space is also where healing begins, where you relearn your own voice, where you notice how tired you were, how heavy your chest had become, how much strength it took just to maintain what was slowly breaking you. You may grieve what you remove, and grief does not mean you made the wrong choice. It means you loved deeply. It means you are human, and grief can coexist with relief, even if that confuses you at first, because relief feels disloyal to pain. But relief is often the body's way of telling you that you have chosen alignment over attachment, that you have stopped forcing growth in soil that could not sustain it. And this is where your Barakah begins to return, not all at once, but gently, in small moments of ease, in unexpected calm, in the way your heart no longer feels like it is constantly negotiating its own survival. There is wisdom in walking away before bitterness grows roots, because bitterness does not only poison what you leave, It follows you into what comes next. And removal done with awareness is an act of mercy, not just for yourself, but for the future version of you who deserves to love without shrinking, to give without bleeding, to stay without losing themselves. And this requires courage, not the loud kind, but the quiet courage of disappointing others in order to remain truthful to your inner state. You do not need to justify your healing to anyone who benefited from your silence. You do not need permission to choose peace over chaos. And you do not need to wait until something completely destroys you before you acknowledge that it is harmful, because intuition rarely screams. It whispers, and it has been whispering to you for a long time, asking you to stop watering what drains you, asking you to trust that life will grow again in healthier places, asking you to believe that what is meant for you will not require you to abandon yourself to keep it alive. And when you finally put the watering can down, when your hands tremble because they are no longer busy maintaining illusion, you will realize that your worth was never tied to how much you could endure, that your value does not increase with suffering, that Barakah flows where honesty lives, and honesty sometimes demands removal, even when attachment begs you to stay, even when fear tells you that emptiness is worse than pain, even when habit insists that this is all you know. Some things don't look dangerous at first. They grow quietly in the corners of your life, blending in with your routine, your relationships, your thoughts. They don't scream. They don't attack. They simply exist, slowly draining the light, the peace, the blessing from everything they touch. And you wonder why your heart feels heavy, why your prayers feel distant, why your efforts feel empty even when you're doing all the right things. Today is not about adding more to your life. It's about removing what is killing your barakah. Because growth is not only about what you plant, it's also about what you pull out by the roots before it poisons the soil of your soul. When you stop feeding what was harming you, something unexpected happens. Your hands feel unfamiliar to you because for so long they were occupied with holding, fixing, proving, rescuing, and now they are empty, and emptiness feels like loss only to those who do not yet understand that emptiness is also readiness, that it is the state before something honest can arrive. But before arrival there is discomfort, because you must sit with yourself without distraction, without the identity you built around endurance. And this is where many people panic and run back, not because the plant was good, but because it was familiar. And familiarity can feel safer than freedom when freedom demands responsibility for your own happiness. You begin to notice how much of your energy was being negotiated away in small moments, how many decisions were filtered through fear of losing, fear of being misunderstood, fear of being alone. And now those fears rise to the surface because they are no longer buried under routine sacrifice. And this is where growth asks you to stay present instead of escaping, to witness the patterns you tolerated, the excuses you mastered, the way you learned to confuse intensity with connection and survival with love. Healing is not gentle at first, it is honest, and honesty can feel harsh when you have been lying to yourself for a long time, not maliciously, but out of necessity, because you did what you needed to do to cope, to belong, to feel chosen. And there is compassion required in that realization. Compassion for the version of you who stayed because they did not yet know how to leave without collapsing. Compassion for the heart that thought loyalty meant self-erasure. Compassion for the soul that mistook consistency for safety. As clarity returns, you may feel anger, not just at what hurt you, but at yourself. And this anger is not a failure, it is a boundary being born. It is the part of you waking up and saying, I deserved better. And that sentence alone can feel revolutionary to someone who learned to measure worth by usefulness. And this anger does not need to be acted upon. It needs to be understood, because beneath it is grief. And beneath grief is self-respect reclaiming its place. You will remember moments that once felt beautiful and now feel heavy. And you will question yourself, wondering if you exaggerated the harm, if you were too sensitive, if you gave up too soon. And this is where discernment matters, because not everything that felt good was good for you, and not everything that hurt was meaningful. And maturity is learning to separate nostalgia from truth, to honor memories without letting them dictate your future, to accept that something can have been real and still be wrong for where you are going. The return of Barakah is subtle. It does not announce itself with fireworks. It arrives quietly, in the way your chest feels lighter when you wake up, in the way your prayers feel less strained, in the way your body no longer braces itself for emotional impact. And you may not notice it immediately because you are still adjusting to peace. And peace can feel boring to someone who has lived in survival mode, but boredom is often the nervous system learning that it no longer needs to stay alert. You start to recognize how much noise you once tolerated, how many red flags you reframed as tests, how often you silenced your intuition because you were afraid of what it would require you to do. And now that intuition speaks more clearly, not loudly, but consistently, and consistency is the language of truth. It does not need to persuade, it simply is. And when you listen, you realize how much guidance you ignored in favor of attachment. There is a temptation to replace one plant with another, to fill the space quickly so you do not have to feel the vulnerability of openness. But this is where patience becomes protection, because rushing into something new without integration will only recreate the same pattern in a different form. And healing is not about speed, it is about depth, about allowing lessons to settle into wisdom rather than trauma, about choosing alignment over urgency. You may feel misunderstood by those who benefited from your staying, and their confusion does not require your explanation, because explanations often become negotiations, and you are no longer negotiating your well-being, and it is uncomfortable to be seen as the villain in someone else's story. But being misunderstood is sometimes the cost of being self-honest, and honesty will always offend the parts of people that rely on your silence. As you grow, you will notice how your standards change, not because you have become cold, but because you have become clear. And clarity feels threatening to those who thrived in your confusion, and you will no longer feel the need to convince, to chase, to overgive in order to secure connection. Because connection that requires performance is not connection, it is transaction. And you are no longer willing to pay with your peace. The space you protected begins to teach you who you are without struggle. And this can feel disorienting, because for a long time your identity was shaped by what you endured, by how much you could carry, by how long you could stay. And now you must learn a new way of being, one where rest is not guilt, where joy is not followed by anxiety, where love does not feel like something you have to earn through pain. You will become more selective with where you place your energy, not because you are afraid of but because you understand the cost of misplacement. And this discernment is not harsh, it is gentle and firm, like closing a door quietly instead of slamming it. And you will realize that saying no is not rejection, it is redirection. And every no creates space for a more honest yes. At times, loneliness will visit you, not the empty kind, but the reflective kind, the kind that asks you to sit with yourself and see what you avoided before. And loneliness is not a sign that you made the wrong choice. It is a sign that you are in transition, that your old coping mechanisms no longer apply, and new connections have not yet formed, and transitions are uncomfortable because they are honest. You will begin to trust yourself again slowly, because trust was damaged not only by others, but by the moments you ignored your own truth. And rebuilding that trust requires consistency, requires showing up for yourself in small ways, requires choosing rest when you are tired, distance when something feels wrong, and patience when fear tells you to rush back into familiarity. And in this rebuilding, you start to feel your strength differently, not as endurance, but as presence, not as sacrifice, but as stability. And you realize that the strongest thing you ever did was not staying, it was leaving with awareness, leaving without hatred, leaving without needing the other side to understand, and choosing to protect the soil of your heart so that whatever grows next is nourished by truth rather than fear. There comes a moment when you realize that your healing is no longer fragile, that it does not depend on constant reassurance or perfect conditions, and this realization changes the way you move through the world, because you are no longer scanning every interaction for danger, no longer bracing yourself for disappointment before it even arrives. And this does not mean you are naive again, it means you are grounded. It means your strength has shifted from vigilance to discernment, and discernment is calm. It does not rush, it does not panic, it simply observes and decides. You begin to notice how differently you respond now. How situations that once triggered anxiety now invite curiosity. How conversations that once pulled you into self-doubt now end with clarity. And this is how you know something has changed. Not because life became easier, but because you became steadier. Because your sense of self is no longer negotiable, and you no longer abandon yourself to preserve connection. The memory of what you removed may still surface, but it no longer controls you. It no longer demands explanation or justification. It passes through you like weather instead of settling like a storm. And this is an important distinction because healing is not the absence of memory. It is the absence of captivity. It is remembering without reliving. It is acknowledging without reopening wounds. You start to understand that Barakah was never something you had to chase. It was something that responded to alignment. And alignment requires honesty, even when honesty costs you comfort, even when it changes how people perceive you, even when it asks you to release roles that once gave you a sense of importance, because importance rooted in self-sacrifice is heavy, and you were not meant to carry weight that was never yours. As your inner world settles, you become more intentional with your outer one, with where you go, who you listen to, what you consume, and you realize that not everything deserves access to you. Not every opinion requires a response. Not every invitation needs a yes. And this selectivity does not shrink your world. It refines it. It removes noise so that meaning can be heard. You may find yourself grieving a version of yourself that no longer exists, the one who overextended, who hoped endlessly, who believed that love meant staying no matter the cost. And this grief is tender because that version of you was trying to survive with the tools they had, and honoring them does not mean returning to their habits. It means learning from their sacrifices and choosing differently now. There is a quiet confidence that grows when you stop betraying yourself. A confidence that does not announce itself, that does not need validation, that is felt more than seen. And this confidence changes the way others relate to you because people can sense when access is earned rather than assumed, and some will rise to meet you there while others will fade, not out of malice, but out of incompatibility. You no longer fear fading connections because you understand that endings are not always losses. Sometimes they are completions. Sometimes they are closures that allow energy to return to where it belongs. And this understanding brings peace, not indifference, but acceptance, a deep trust that what leaves creates space for what aligns. Your relationship with yourself becomes the standard, not in a rigid way, but in a reflective one. You ask how something feels rather than how it looks, how it affects your nervous system rather than how it impresses others. And this internal reference point protects you from repeating cycles because you are no longer outsourcing your worth. You begin to experience joy without suspicion, rest without guilt, love without anxiety. And these moments may feel unfamiliar at first because chaos once felt normal, but normal does not mean healthy. And as your system recalibrates, peace becomes less strange, less something you question, and more something you trust. There will still be challenges because growth does not remove difficulty. It changes how you meet it. And when challenges arise now, you do not immediately blame yourself. You do not search for what you did wrong to deserve them. Instead, you ask, what is being revealed? What is being strengthened? What is being redirected? You understand now that removal was not an ending. It was an initiation. An initiation into a life where your energy is respected, where your presence is intentional, where your heart is protected without being closed. And this balance is delicate, but it is possible, and it is sustained through self-awareness rather than self-denial. You stop romanticizing struggle because you have seen where that road leads, and you no longer equate suffering with depth, because depth can exist in gentleness, in stability, in relationships that do not require constant repair. And this This realization frees you from seeking intensity as proof of meaning. Your intuition becomes a trusted companion rather than a distant voice, because you have learned what happens when you ignore it, and you honor it now, not out of fear, but out of respect. And respect creates harmony. It allows you to move through life with less resistance, less force, less exhaustion. You are no longer trying to be understood by everyone, because you understand yourself, and that understanding anchors you when opinions shift, when circumstances change, when outcomes are uncertain, and uncertainty no longer terrifies you because you trust your ability to respond rather than control. As you continue forward, you carry the lesson gently, not as armor, but as awareness. You know now that what you nurture determines what grows, that attention is power, that love requires wisdom, and that removal, when done with clarity, is an act of devotion to the life you are meant to live, to the barakah that flows when your heart is aligned, to the future that opens when you finally stop watering what was never meant to stay.